Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Good morning. So I'm a professor in game studies from University of Quebec in Montreal, and today I will talk about a theory that I'm currently developing, so it's still a work in progress, and it's about something that I call the ideology of play. And I'll take questions at the end because I'm really short on time and I don't want to lose track of time, so I will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. So several game scholars have shown concerns for the pervasiveness of capitalist ideologies in video games, for the exploitation by developer companies of the players' unpaid labor, as well as the exploitation of players' personal data for advertising and commercial purposes. However, very few game scholars try to understand how play can itself be conceived as an ideology that efficiently masks the power relations between the game industry and the players. In fact, the only mention of play that I found related to ideology is in Julian Kuklich's one-paragraph definition of labor, which explains that labor is suffused with an ideology of play, which effectively masks labor as play and disguises the process of self-expropriation as self-expression. So drawing on this great insight, I will try to explain what this ideology of play consists of. I will identify different functions and mechanisms on the basis of which this ideology of play legitimizes exploitation and surveillance. I will show how it permeates various types of discourse in the gaming culture, and I will provide a glimpse of how we game scholars can challenge this ideology of play. So, according to Stuart Hall, ideologies are sets of concepts and premises which provide the framework through which we represent, interpret, and make sense of some aspect of our social existence. The free market ideology, for instance, is a set of ideas according to which letting the owner of the production means appropriate the profits generated by the worker's labor is the best way to create wealth for an entire nation. And as Hall explains, ideologies are sets of open and apparent ideas, but their roots and foundations tend to stay hidden. So the majority of people in our society openly defend the idea that capitalism is the less worse system, but fail to see that this idea has been conveyed by the ruling class via the free market ideology. So as Hall explains, ideologies do not rely on a single concept, but rather on the articulation of different concepts into chains of meanings. The capitalist ideology, for instance, is based on the association of freedom with free market and individualism, as well as on the opposition of freedom with equality of condition, while the socialist ideology relies on the association of freedom with equality of condition. So the concept of freedom is present in both ideologies, but articulated with different concepts. So drawing on these theories, I would like to suggest that the ideology of play consists in a set of ideas that, according to which play is more valuable and desirable than anything else, to the point that it justifies unpaid labor, as well as the collection and use of players' data that often leads to breaches of privacy and surveillance. So I would also like to propose that the ideology of play relies on the traditional association of play with leisure, relaxation, and pleasure, as well as its traditional opposition with demanding and productive work that can be traced back to Aristotle and that Kant reiterated in his book on education. And because exploitation and surveillance are often opposed to freedom, I would also like to say that the ideology of play relies on a traditional association of play with a free, voluntary, separated, and unproductive activity that can be found in the work of Huizinga and Kayua, who are, as you know, considered as the two spiritual fathers of play studies. So according to Hall, social subjects tend to have a false consciousness of their living conditions because ideology displays their focus. Workers make sense of their living condition through the prism of the free market ideology, which refracts the exploitation of their labor by the ruling class and makes it appear as a relationship based on equality and mutual exchanges. So as a result, the ruling class does not exert control over the working class directly through coercion, but it exerts power over the working class indirectly through ideologies that allow it to win the consent of the workers and encourage the workers to submit willingly. And similarly, players perceive their situation through an ideology of play which disguises the exploitation of their labor and personal data into a pleasurable, voluntary, unproductive, and playful activity. Therefore, game developers exert powers over players indirectly by coaxing them into believing that the action of the companies are always taken in the best interest of the players to maximize their pleasure in the game and enhance their gaming experiences. So Stuart Hall explains that ideologies operate through language, discourses, images, and representations, and the capitalist ideology, for instance, works through discourses about negotiation of wages, purchasing power, and consumer freedom. And we can add to Stuart Hall's theory that the rhetoric plays an important role in conveying ideologies. Rhetoric has been defined by Plato and Aristotle as the art of using speech and discourses to persuade, manipulate, or seduce. And among the guidelines to master this art feature the use of rhetorical figures. So rhetorical figures are phrases in which the words are not used in accordance with their own conventionally accepted meaning or denotation. So just to give you an example here and talk a little more about Stuart Hall's theory, discourses about purchasing power, for instance, make the exploitation of the working class by the ruling class look like it's contrary. That is to say, a relationship based on independence, equality, and freedom. So this is a function that Stuart Hall calls the camera obscura, and that I associated with the rhetorical figure of inversion. Discourses about contracts and bargains make one aspect of the relationship between the workers and the managers, that is to say the moment when they negotiate salaries, stand for the entire relation, and it's a function that Stuart Hall names fetishism, and that can be linked to the rhetorical trope of synecdoche, in which a part of something is used to refer to the whole thing. And finally, discourses about consumer freedom mask the roots of the power structures between workers and the owner of the production means by emphasizing on their mutual exchanges. And this principle that Stuart Hall calls concealment can, in my opinion, be related to the rhetorical figure of ellipsis and hyperbole. So don't worry, we'll have many examples to clarify this later on. So starting from the premise that a set of idea only becomes an ideology when it's pervasive and conveyed by various type of discourses and very widespread in our society, I analyzed with the help of 4 research assistants the rhetorical constructs of several types of discourse that circulate in the gaming culture, from terms of service to privacy policies, public statements from community managers posted on forums, and discussion between players on forums, as well as gamification, what I call gamification evangelist article. So I obviously don't have the time to go over all the examples that we found reading all these discourses, but you can upload, I think some of you have access to the 16 pages article that I uploaded on the conference website, so feel free to take a look at it to understand the magnitude of the phenomenon. Okay, so the terms of service are legal agreements between players and game developers that set out some rules for using the games company's product and services. And in July, we analyzed the terms of service of these companies, which are companies that make games that heavily rely on user-generated content. And most of these terms of service were written in a very dry legal language instead of using rhetorical figures. All companies explicitly state that players can create content with the game's assets for non-commercial use only. They also specify that when players make their content available through the game, they automatically grant the company the irrevocable right to use, reproduce, modify, distribute it, and accept that they may not get a credit or attribution for it. So in the terms of service, we identified only one sentence which relied on the rhetorical figure of inversion and tried to convince players that the appropriation of their free labor is made for their own good to maximize the quality of the game. Valve may make modifications to workshop contribution as it deems necessary and desirable to enhance gameplay. A sentence from Mojang's terms of service, for its part, tries to persuade players that using the game's asset for commercial purposes undermine play and enjoyment. Don't just rip out resources and pass them around, that's no fun. So nonetheless, something caught our attention while reading the terms of service: the total absence of mentions regarding the gain, the profit, the benefit that user-generated content brings to these game companies. And therefore, I'd like to suggest that in terms of service, the ideology of play is subtly conveyed by rhetorical constructs that fall into the category of omission. The ideology of play is much more visible in the rhetorical constructs of privacy policies, which are legal statements that expose the ways a company collect, use, disclose users' personal data. We analyze the privacy policies of these multiplayer games and mobile game companies that tend to monetize players' data. And I was actually astonished by the number of sentences that try to persuade the players that the collection of their personal data is made for their own benefit, to improve the quality of the game and increase their fun. So just as an example, King uses personal data to improve and optimize the game and to ensure the best player experience. Rovio to enhance your experience and enjoyment using its games. Blizzard for creating the well-designed, highly enjoyable entertainment experience you can find within its epic games. And a similar reason is evoked by game companies to gather players' personal data. The other reason is to say that it prevents anything that might affect the player's pleasure. So since Blizzard core value is play nice, play fair, it uses personal data to minimize fraud, cheating, and abusing behavior. Now, Riot gathers personal data to prevent toxicity and to offer player a fair, fun, competitive gaming experience. So all these sentences are phrased in a way that makes one aspect of the relationship between the developers and the players, that is to say the service provided by the company to the players, appear as their entire relationship. And in privacy policies, this rhetorical figure of synecdoche works in concert with the rhetorical figure of ellipsis. Nothing is explicitly said about the revenues generated by the monetization of the player's data. Companies do not even try to justify this practice by saying that it allows them to offer the game for free or for cheap. The ideology of play can also be distinguished in public statements that community managers post on game companies' official websites and forums. When answering the players' question regarding unpaid mods, for example, Bethesda's community manager highlighted the role of mods in enhancing all players' gaming experience. He said, "We love what the game community has done with mods. Modding ensures tons of continued content and experience for our game." And the community manager also justified uncompensated players' labor by insisting on the importance of avoiding compatibility issues that might affect gameplay. This also guarantees that all content works together. Allowing paid mods would likely cause a ton of issues. So these sentences are based on the rhetorical figure of omission and hyperbole, since the companies conceal its exploitation of the players' unpaid labor by giving the impression that the quality of the game is all that matters to them and to the players. Also, the relationship between game developers and players is often depicted in terms of collaboration instead of exploitation. Bethesda community manager explained that there's a constant demand from our fans to add more official high-quality content to our game, and while we're able to create a lot of it, we think that many of our community have the talent to work directly with us and create some amazing new things. And when Dota 2 announced in August 2014 the release of a new set of tools to create game mods, the community manager invited players to help them make Dota 2 even bigger and better. So it's really depicted as a win-win cooperation here. So these sentences are all based on the rhetorical figure of inversion. They depict the exploitation of the player's unpaid labor as its opposite, that is to say, a win-win cooperation. Community manager also used phrasing that portrays mods as free and open activity in a way that brings it closer to play and further from work. On Dota 2 official forum, mods are even directly referred to as play by the community manager. And the ideology of play can also be unveiled in public exchanges between players and that often revolve around the topic of user-generated content. We analyzed conversation between players on Minecraft and Little Big Planet's non-official forums because these communities have modders that are very active and vocal. And a particularly interesting conversation between several players took place in June 2012 on Minecraft non-official forum after a player mentioned that several Minecraft mods were illegal because they were using the game's assets. Many other players accused him of destroying the creative freedom of the modding community while highlighting that mods are what prevent Minecraft of becoming stagnant, boring. Someone said, "You're going to be remembered as that jackass who got a whole bunch of popular mods shut down because he hated people having fun." So here you can see that fun is valued more than conformity to terms of service, while modding seems considered as a type of play, a free play instead of work. Yet, a conversation between Little Big Planet's level editors says a lot about the amount of time, effort, and organization it takes to create a good level. And players confide on this forum that they spent months, if not years, planning, sketching, brainstorming. Some players even form what they call a development team to maximize their chance of success and motivate them to finish their working when they might think about giving up. So some players are actually using the term work to refer to the act of level editing or modding. So just like most workers know that the owners of the production means make profit with the fruit of their labor, players are very aware that mods secure revenues for game companies. Mojang knows that the modding community is their bread and butter. From a business point of view, modding has given Mojang hundreds of free employees. However, players do not seem to be bothered by it. They perceive the situation as a win-win that enrich their life and those of the company. Some players seem to value play more than making money and even consider monetization as a game in itself instead of a necessary source of revenue. This is a very interesting quote. "I never expected to make anything off of my Minecraft video, but it was nice to see it grow by a few pennies every day just for the fun of it." So even monetization is becoming a game for players. So just like most workers have interiorized the free market ideology and believe in the merits of the capitalist system, these players seem to have interiorized the ideology of play, to believe in the merit of unpaid mods, and to perceive their relationship with game companies in terms of collaboration instead of exploitation. And this shows how deeply ingrained the ideology of play is in the gaming culture. Now, the ideology of play finally permeates the discourse of gamification evangelists. Gamification is defined as the implementation of design concepts from games, loyalty programs, and behavioral economics to drive user engagement. Gamification evangelists often defend the idea that gamification techniques such as point, badges, leaderboard increase users and employees' enjoyment and happiness as much as the company's wealth. But it has been demonstrated by game scholars that these techniques also legitimize surveillance and increase productivity pressure. So the website Growth Engineering, for example, claims that leaderboard benefits employees and the company's wider purpose. And nothing is said or mentioned about the discomfort that workers might feel within this system, even though the website specifies that the leaderboards provide simple ways for admins to compare learners, pinpoint floundering learners, so they can do something to help change it. So the system is really allowing surveillance of employees here, and it's said on the website. And yet we learned that from workers' testimonies that gamification techniques such as leaderboards can sometimes feel like electronic whips. So the gamification, what I call gamification evangelist, seems to use the growing valorization of play in our society as a pretext to justify performance pressure and surveillance. Unlike video games community manager, what's interesting is that they do not try to dissociate play from work. On the contrary, they try to change the people's perception of games on that aspect. Zickerman and Linder says the line between work and play was plain, it was defined, and it was very, very serious. However, this is simply no longer true. So gamification evangelists, however, try to preserve the association of play with pleasure, fun, and enjoyment by multiplying these buzzwords in their discourses and therefore using the rhetorical figure of repetition. And that's it for the gamification evangelists. Now I would like to defend the idea that the ideology of play mobilizes three mechanisms identified by Stuart Hall. The first mechanism is masking. So the ideology of play is actually masking the exploitation of the player's labor or data by emphasizing on the collaboration between players and developers into making better games. It's also fragmenting the group interest of the players, that is to say, for example, preserving their right to privacy, into egoistic individual needs, that is to say, having personalized gaming experiences. One example of that is that most companies will say that they collect your information to personalize, optimize their services and your player experiences. So, and interestingly, most privacy policies address the players by using the pronoun you. And because humans need to feel part of a collectivity, of a group, the ideology of play also unites these egoistic individuals by constantly reminding them that they are members of a player's community. They are bounded by a common passion for the game. Here, like most companies, Playtika collects information to provide players a better social gaming experience and enable them to communicate with each other. So for Stuart Hall, bringing the hidden premises of ideologies to our consciousness is a revolutionary act in itself that requires reasoning and arguing. When people join their force, it can even bring about changes in the situation. And this is what happened when Minecraft modified its term of service in 2012 after players complained about the fact that it was preventing them from monetizing their video of Minecraft mods. Some players said, the phrase bites the hand that feeds you comes to mind, but hey, I guess they already made it big in the gaming community, so they don't care if they bite that hand or even cut it off. However, it would be utopian to believe that we can get rid of ideologies since they are deeply ingrained in our society, in the game culture. According to Stuart Hall, the only way we can fight ideologies is by breaking the chains of meaning and re-articulating their elements to produce new meanings. So in light of Hall's theory, I would like to suggest that game scholars contribute to the re-articulation of the ideology of play by blurring the boundaries between labor and play, like Kuklish did with his concept of playbur. Game scholars can also question the association of play with pleasure by highlighting the fact that the gaming experience involves frustration, boredom, and fatigue sometimes, and sometimes pretty often. And also by replacing the word fun by the idea of engagement in their definition, such as it has been done by Salen, Zimmerman, Ewell, for instance. And game scholars can finally untie the concepts of freedom and play, like Henriot did, for example, by saying it's not true to say that we're not playing if we're coerced to play, if we're forced to play. We can play if we're forced to play, as long as we adopt a ludic attitude. And also Duflo also untied the concept of freedom and play by saying that the freedom of a player is the ability to choose, move, and invent solutions within a game instead of the decision of playing or not playing. So these are all things that we can do to actually challenge the ideology of play as game scholars. So a lot of work still needs to be done to map all ramifications of this ideology of play. The analysis that I conducted so far just scratched the surface of a giant iceberg. I suspect that the ideology of play spread in many other sectors of our society than the game and culture, and my ultimate goal in the upcoming years would be to develop a holistic theory about the ideology of play that would take into account the wider field of discourses in which it operates. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabrielle. We have time for one quick question. Oh.
Maybe I should stand up so people can hear me. I was going to ask you a question, but now that it seems to me that it's a bad question, and let me just briefly clarify why it's a bad question, and then you perhaps elaborate in 1 minute. I was going to ask you about the division, and if there is a division, and why there is a division between the idea that certain games are capitalistic, at least more capitalistic than other games, on the one hand, and on the other hand, the idea or the sort of sensation that gaming, the entire gaming activity as such, per se, is a justification of capitalism. But then it struck me that the actual idea of there being a difference is ideology. Ideology is the idea implemented in us that gives you the idea that there's a contradiction. That once you solve the puzzle, then you're free. Once you're outside the box, then you can look at capitalism. But ideology is this false contradiction.
Yeah, ideologies are ideas that we all have in our head that are interiorized, and they're like semi-conscious, like we can get aware of them if we spend time thinking about them, but most of the time we go on with our lives not really thinking about these ideas that are orienting our decision, our actions, etc. But yeah, as you said, this game is capitalistic, this game is not. We all perceive them as such because of an ideology or because of the role that ideology plays in our life.
Yeah, so basically we're fucked.
Well, as I said, as game scholars, we have the power to challenge this ideology by untying the association between play, pleasure, play, freedom, play, and work. We can make the point that work and play are not necessarily opposed to each other.